sunny outside. The temperature's not too bad, although it's a little breezy. I'm Ken Godevanis, and this is Digging for Scriptural Gems. It's a joy to be back after several weeks of absence due to health. Now feeling pretty good and ready for us to pick up from where we left off, studying 2 Samuel chapter 1, verses 1 to 10. We're doing that once again just to see how some of the commentators are dealing with the apparent difference that we noted in the story from 1 Samuel chapter 31, the last chapter of the first book of Samuel, and then the account that the Amalekite gives us in the first chapter of 2 Samuel. In 1 Samuel chapter 1, we read that Saul intentionally fell on his sword and died. But in this chapter, 2 Samuel chapter 1, the story told by the Amalekite is quite different. He says he did Saul a favor and killed him when he came upon him. Let's see how various commentators deal with this. Chuck Smith writes, in effect, this. Excuse me. He says it may be that this Amalekite is making up this story about Saul, thinking that he's going to get in good with David because he killed David's enemy. Actually, Saul was never David's enemy. Rather, it was Saul who saw David as his enemy. It was Saul who had been trying to destroy David. Saul, in essence, was David's adversary. And maybe the Amalekite felt that by making up a story, I killed him, that he would find favor in David's eyes. It could be this is a lie, and it could be it is true. And Smith goes on, now it could be that the young man is telling the truth even after running himself through with his own sword, falling on his sword. It could be that still Saul had not fully died. Still, he was still alive, and he saw this young man and said to him, "Who are you?" "I'm an Amalekite," the young man replies. And Saul goes on to say, "Kill me, please. I don't want the Philistines to catch me and torture me." It could be that he did slay him, or it could be that he's making up this story that he came and found Saul dead, ripped off his crown and his bracelets, and made up the story. I don't know, and you're only left to conjecture. Nobody really knows for certain. End of quote from Chuck Smith. Smith does say, though, that if this is true, we have here an interesting spiritual lesson. This young man was an Amalekite. Saul had been ordered by God to kill all the Amalekites. He did not. And now one comes back to kill him. Here's the lesson according to Smith. If we do not slay the evil in our lives, it will come back to slay us. Think about that. Think about the evil in your life as I think about the evil in my life. If I don't slay that, there's a good possibility that it will come back to slay me, or in your case, you. David Guzik, on the other hand, is set on the Amalekite story as being a total lie. No question to him. He writes, quoting Clark, quote, "The whole account which this young man gives is a fabrication. In many of the particulars, it is grossly self-contradictory. There's no fact in the case, but the bringing of the crown or diadem and bracelets of Saul, which, as he appears to have been a plunderer of the slain, he found on the field of battle, and he brought them to David, and told the lie of having dispatched Saul merely to ingratiate himself with David." End of quote. He adds, though, we can gather that this was a lie because 1 Samuel chapter 31, verse 5 says that Saul's armor bearer saw to it that he was dead, or saw that he was dead. Guzik agrees with Smith on the spiritual lesson of the account. However, as he writes, using this picture, we see that Saul's failure to deal with Amalek, when God told him to, ended in ruin, with an Amalekite delivering the death blow. In the same way, when we fail to deal with the flesh as God prompts us, we can expect that area of the flesh to come back and deliver some deadly strikes. May we deal with any enemy of the flesh that we have before it strikes us back. Matthew Henry puts the matter this way: it is doubtful whether this sad story be true. If it be, the righteousness of God is to be observed, that Saul, who spared the Amalekites in the contempt of the divine command, received his death's wound from an Amalekite. But most interpreters think that it was false, and that, though he might happen to be present, Matthew Henry continues, yet he was not assisting in the death of Saul, but told David so in expectation that he would reward him for it, as having done him a piece of good service. Those who would rejoice at the fall of an enemy are apt to measure others by themselves and to think that they will do so also. End of quote. We'll have to wait and see just how David responded. Here's another interesting point that Henry brings out. Quote, the traditions of the Jews is that this Amalekite was the son of Doeg, for the Amalekites were descended from Edom, and that Doeg, who they suppose was Saul's armor-bearer, as we mentioned in an earlier study, before he slew himself, gave Saul's crown and bracelet, the ensigns of his royalty, to his son, and bade him carry them to David to curry favor with him. So Doeg is dying, takes the bracelet and the crown, gives it to his son, and says, take them to David. He'll give you some good reaction, good response. He'll find favor in you and save you. Probably what any normal father would do. But the commentator says this is groundless conceit. Doeg's son, it is likely, was so well known to Saul that he needed not ask him as he did this Amalekite, who art thou? Robert Jameson agrees with Smith, Gusick, and Henry, saying, as the narrative of Saul's death, given in the last chapter, that is, of the last chapter of 1 Samuel, is inspired, it must be considered the true account, and the Amalekite story a fiction of his own, invented to ingratiate himself with David, the presumptive successor to the throne. End of quote. Although one could argue that the first chapter of 2 Samuel is also inspired, which then leaves me in a quandary. I'm not sure I fully understand Jameson's point here, that 1 Samuel 31 is inspired, but 2 Samuel 1 is not. But I'll leave it to you. So there we have it. The majority of commentators and all those above see this account of the Amalekite as being a lie. Next time we will see how David sees it. In the province of Canada where I live, we are just less than 2 weeks away from a provincial election. We're a few months away from the selection of a new leader for one of the major parties federally. And our neighbors to the south, the Americans, well, they're just over 5 months away from important congressional elections, probably the most important midterm elections they have had in decades, if not a century. Political candidates are all giving us accounts of what they believe is the truth, as this Amalekite did David. We, more than ever, now need to seek God's help in being able to discern the truth. Next time, we'll see how the rightful king now responds to this Amalekite. Join us for that, won't you? In the meantime, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, share these videos with others, write to us with questions, with comments, your thoughts, and keep on studying God's Word. We'll see you next time.